Hello, everyone. So, for my project, I tried to talk about mental health impacts on Asian Americans because this is a large topic that really impacts members of the Asian American community. So, I believe it is very important to acknowledge and address, learn more about, but also to acknowledge given how it is greatly undervalued and not really addressed within the larger society. So I wanted to, shed light on it, really to acknowledge it, despite my not being a member of that community. So for my first image, it talks about how mental health is a spectrum and not a binary. But I believe this is very important because it relates to Asian Americans, but mental health overall. How society often portrays mental health in this binary of either or, when there are a lot of nuance, a lot of variety in people's thoughts, feelings, emotions, and the way they enact and make decisions based on you know the state they're in. It's not always going to be an either or, one or the other, the way society often portrays it as. So it's very important to perceive mental health in this light, with this mentality that it is not binary, as mental health can deteriorate over time, but it may also improve over time. And there's not a one size fits all model that everybody can just be attached to, because it may look different from day to day, and there are different ways um, to enact on it, different behavioral traits and issues. So it's a large topic that it needs to be addressed, that it can look differently, from day to day, from time to time. So it's very important to preface with that issue. But that will lead on to the next image, where we see a young woman um, raveling what appears to be film inside of a giant head. This really highlights the programming that goes in when it comes to mental health. Because this was actually taken from an article by Amanda Yang, who is a pharmacist, talking about how a lot of Asian Americans are conditioned to think a certain way about mental health. This is commonly seen in not only in Asian cultures, where a lot of Asian individuals are taught from a young age to be quiet, be compliant, to not speak out, and this is further augmented by society's interpretation, perpetuation on how Asian Americans should react and handle mental health issues. A notable example being like the creation of model minority myth, teaching that Asian Americans are hardworking, have high paying jobs, are you know very smart, intelligent, keeping down, keeping quiet, not causing trouble. It leads people to develop these notions and to believe these ideas, essentially indoctrinating people into believing these views, even among Asian Americans themselves, believing this about, their fellow Asian Americans, and, creates a variety of issues, which when we move on to the next slide, you'll see. Here we see a young woman looking into her phone. It's meant to be an image of her looking into her phone's camera. And the issue that arises with this, it creates, a conflict in how Asian Americans perceive themselves, in terms of their identity, and living in their culture. So it really impacts how society impacts how Asian Americans view themselves, which in turn is largely impactful on their mental health, their state of being. We see this in the next image, which relates to issues surrounding imposter syndrome, and just the troubles of navigating identity, particularly for first generation immigrants and second generation immigrants, and if you will them, even if Asian Americans who were born as citizens, they may be the children of immigrants. They're just a matter of balancing out the cultural nuances, um, living in an American society, but then also maintaining and holding on to their cultural roots. So it's a matter of having this balance and being tugged at from many different sides and many different you know structural sides, trying to tell Asian Americans who they are, as opposed to Asian Americans being able to state that for themselves. So this image is meant to highlight that internal struggle that occurs. That leads us to the next image: the rise of Asian American hate and its effect on mental health. So this was a big um, issue that was highlighted. So it did not start during the pandemic, but it was largely highlighted during it. So more people became aware of issues that are already happening, and a number of incidents were, did increase from what it already was. So it was taken from an article written by Dr. Kayleen Bob, um, from from for National Minority Mental Health Month, and it was from the Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate Organization, stating that they received 6,603 reports of Asian hate incidents, including verbal harassment, avoidance/shunning, physical assault, and online harassment. But this is only the number of incidents that were reported, because once again, part of Asian American culture is to not report incidents, as research actually shows that Asian Americans are one of the groups who are least likely to report incidents that occur to them. One of many reasons being due to fear of retaliation, fearing it'll impact their status. Say like if they're a green card holder or they're in the immigration process, they may be on a student visa, or also they simply do not believe that the system in place, like the American system, cares about them and will do anything about them, which is which really it's really emphasized by how these incidents are often ignored, how the aggressors are often not held accountable, and how there's not really a large push to provide resources, accommodations, and just support for people who are victimized and people who are on the receiving end of bigotry, anti-Asian sentiment and racism. But then this leads into the next image, which really highlights the implications and the actions Asian Americans exhibit. So you see this image of a young woman. The left image has the words "I'm okay," while the right image it shows the full picture. So the left image is meant to be what society sees. They see "I'm okay," which is once again relates to the minority myth. How many people see Asians, being wealthy, smart, quote unquote the best, and the way people should properly behave and live their lives or whatnot. But when you see the full image on the right, the words "not" and "ay" are obscured if you look at a certain angle, you know. But you look at the full picture, you're able to see "I'm not okay," which shows that while yes, Asian Americans, you know, yeah, they can do well, they can have all these achievements. They're so human and they still have struggles, which are made worse by the fact that these struggles are overlooked due to the most successful are the ones who are highlighted, who are in the media, who are often uplifted, while those, who live in low income areas, those who are living below poverty, those who face discrimination in the workplace and academics and whatnot, they are overlooked and ignored. These issues are not addressed. So, including the fact that Asian Americans have one of the largest disparities in income, those living in poverty, making below the average of other, ethnic groups and even other some certain minority groups as well. So this really shows that how there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and a lot of the truth that what's happening is obscured, and people are, once again, people are, led to believe, have these certain perceptions of Asian Americans, which in turn impacts and influence their mental health. Which this next image shows through we see this young woman slash girl. She appears to be crying. Now the sticker that says "Hello, I'm suicidal," which really highlights what these mental health issues and crises lead to. Self mutilation, self harm, suicidal thoughts. Where there are a number of young Asian students, for example, who due to bullying in school, they've they've actually committed suicide due to the staff, teachers, administration not doing anything about the bullying, not providing resources and help for them, checking on their well-being, and also not holding the culprits available. Just recently, there was also a 5-year-old Asian boy who was recently chased to his house by some middle schoolers. They were filming it, laughing. You could be heard screaming, asking them to not hurt him, and screaming for somebody to save him. A very traumatic experience for someone, for anyone, especially for a 5-year-old, being chased by being outnumbered, chased by a number of bullies who are also significantly older, taller, larger than him. You know, this is something that number of Asian Americans deal with on a daily basis, where they face these struggles. They go through they're bullied on the receiving end of a lot of this brutality, and it is overlooked and ignored, invalidated, and many perceive it as not being a big deal due to, once again, modern minority myth and this perception that is just augmented by the media systems in place and whatnot. But regardless of all of these challenges and struggles, also I did not want to only focus on the negative aspects. I wanted to highlight some positives, such as this image here. See this young woman walking out of a cage. This highlights how Asian Americans more so are becoming more resources, more accessibility, more knowledge is being introduced to Asian Americans. Asian Americans are taking charge of their own narratives, voicing their experiences, not allowing others to speak for them. And this image is meant to represent that, like being free, being set free, and be able to walking out. See how this woman, she's walking out on her own, has her eyes closed, appears, with a positive, even it's like smiling expression. So not only is she going towards freedom, but she's doing so of her own free will. And to see, there's a sense of positivity due to it, being set free, which represents, this knowledge, education, resources has a positive impact. Leading to the next image, where we see this young Asian woman with her eyes closed, thinking. We have this thought bubble, which includes some, some gears grinding, represent her thinking. We see some flowers and some music, meant to represent a positive, image, positive environment, which really highlights, how having access to mental health resources has a positive impact, a positive influence, not only in the way Asian Americans think, but also the way that they live their lives, the decisions they make, the choices that they make. Just as well, it's inspirational for others to, to pursue mental health resources. Because where I live, there's a mental health resource clinic down the street. Um, you know, it's specifically catered towards Asian Americans because it's an Asian American mental health research clinic, and they have a good number of clients who go in each and every day. So it really shows that having these resources, there are many in the Asian American community who are seeking them out and who are willing to engage, and who are pivoting away from the model, that this previous model of just, avoiding addressing these issues. More are turning towards, seeking out resources, seeking out aid, help, and having that support not only, for themselves, but supporting their fellow Asian Americans, regardless of, pan-ethnic group. I say this as being very essential and important, which leads me to the last image for the slideshow, which actually came from one of the lecture videos for this class. called Ghidra. The reason why I chose to include this image is due to the significance and importance in the Asian American movement. It really highlights, the experiences, struggles of Asian Americans, but also it really shows the achievements of what Asian Americans are able to accomplish. I see this as being, a source of inspiration um, for Asian Americans, whether they are adults, elderly, but also for children, something to be able to pass on to next generations, showing that it was possible to achieve and overcome, these issues, these systemic barriers, systemic racism. It is possible to actually to overcome, be successful, just as well as banding together as a community. When a community does band together and help each other, not out of personal gain or when it's convenient, but more so just for the overall well-being of the community. You know, it actually it is possible to actually take charge and achieve tangible results, which is quite essential because while there is still a lot of progress a long way to go, we see that there are incremental changes occurring, which years ago previously people would not have conceived as being possible. So, with that, that brings to the end of my slideshow presentation. Once again, I just want to emphasize the importance of addressing mental health, not only among Asian Americans but also Pacific Islanders, you know, Latinos, Black people, white people, Indigenous and Native Americans, among all groups, mental health is essential. But I typically chose about Asian American due to, once again, that is large disparities and just generally this topic being overlooked when this community is involved. So thank you for listening, and I hope everybody does well on finals and have a wonderful rest of the semester.